Good morning. My name is Dee Perry. Thank you for that good morning back. And I want to welcome you to today's program. It's part of a special series of Black History Month programs presented by the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation in collaboration with Hiram College, the Cleveland History Center at Western Reserve Historical Society, and WVIZ PBS Idea Stream. Thank you all for being part of this presentation, whether you're here in the Westfield Theater or watching via distance learning from your classroom. And to start the program, we want you to meet some of the people who are helping to make it happen. It's my pleasure to introduce you first to the President and Chief Executive Officer for WVIZ PBS Idea Stream, Mr. Kevin Martin.
Thank you, Dee. Thank you. Welcome to WVIZ Idea Stream Black History Month special program series. This series will be featuring prominent African Americans who are buried in Lakeview Cemetery. Now, the program is sponsored by the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, the Dominion Gas, the Key Bank Foundation, and with special assistance and support from the WVIZ PBS Education Department. The program today is originating, as Dee just mentioned, from the Westfield studio at the Idea Center here at the Playhouse Square. I want to thank our very own Dee Perry of WVIZ Idea Stream for hosting and facilitating this program, and the professors from Hiram College, and to all our guest speakers for each of the 4 programs that will be featured throughout this month. All the many students that will be here throughout the series from Northeast Ohio. I also want to extend a very special thanks to Judy Camo Hart, the Executive Director of the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, Mary Cromer, Director of Community Outreach for the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, our very own Linda Williams, Senior Director of the WVIZ Idea Stream Education Department, and last but certainly not least is John Ramacone, Distance Learning Director at WVIZ Idea Stream, for the behind-the-scenes work that he's doing in creating this outstanding educational program. We hope you enjoy this series.
Thank you to Kevin Martin. Now, before I bring up our next speaker, I want to share a little background about the location that he represents, Lakeview Cemetery. It was founded in 1869, and right from the beginning, people saw it as more than just a burial ground. It was such a beautiful setting with gentle hills and wide stretches of well-kept grass and unusual, unique architecture and a view of Lake Erie on the northern end. It became a popular place for families to go on Sunday outings, and when the monument to the Ohio-born President James Garfield opened at Lakeview in 1890, the cemetery became an even bigger attraction for the public. Today, there are well over 100,000 grave sites at Lakeview, and many of them belong to people whose names you might recognize from your history books. Here to tell us more about what the cemetery represents is the President of the Board of Trustees for the Lakeview Cemetery Foundation, Mr. Mark Druckenbrode. Mark?
Thank you, Dee. Well, good morning. It's an honor to be here with you today. The Lakeview Cemetery Foundation is pleased to bring you the series of lectures on prominent African Americans buried at the Lakeview Cemetery. These individuals have contributed economically, culturally, and civically to Northeast Ohio, the nation, and the world. I'm also very honored and pleased to be collaborating with WVIZ PBS Idea Stream, Hiram College, and the History Center of the Western Reserve Historical Society. And very special thanks again to our sponsors, Key Bank Foundation and Dominion. Black History Month has become a very important part of Lakeview Cemetery's educational programming, in which we promote positive examples of historical events, exemplary leaders, and progress towards social change. This month is not only deeply meaningful for the African American community, but imperative for all of us to gain a better understanding of the nation and of the world. By reliving and remembering Black history, we create an awareness of the struggles and challenges that African Americans overcame in this country. Their perseverance serves as an inspiration for us all. Every race is connected to the rich history of this nation, and by celebrating Black History Month, everyone can be included in the tradition of acknowledgement, inclusion, and community engagement. So I thank you for your presence here today, and welcome.
Thank you to Mark Druckenbrode. Now, for a program like this to happen and for you to be part of it, we needed community partners who would step up and provide support. Coming to the podium next is a representative of one of those partners. She's the Director of Media Relations for Dominion East Ohio. Please welcome Tracy Oliver.
Good morning. I'm Tracy Oliver, the Director of Media and Local Affairs at Dominion East Ohio. It's my privilege to join with KeyBank Foundation in presenting Lakeview Cemetery's Black History Month lecture series. Now, this program provides a wonderful opportunity to recognize the achievements of some truly exceptional men and women as part of our Black History Month celebration. These contributions are important regionally, nationally, and internationally. Dominion sponsored this collaboration in order to provide a unique learning experience. Through this program, we are looking to raise awareness of outstanding leaders and to expose students to people whose lives were both rich and diverse. It is our hope that the hundreds of participating students will pay close attention to the traits and the innovative characteristics of these heroes. Many of their attributes, including hard work, vision, integrity, and a determined spirit, are still vital ingredients of personal and professional success. Dominion incorporates diversity and inclusion as a key component of our business as well. Making decisions based off of multiple perspectives and a range of ideas, it just makes sense. At Dominion, we follow the guiding principles of respect, fairness, and consistency to ensure that our work environment is one in which every team member feels valued so that our corporate culture can attract, develop, and retain the best and the brightest employees. So we're proud to partner with this lecture series, and we look forward to continuing to serve our employees, our customers, and students across the region. Thank you, and enjoy today's program.
Thank you to Tracy Oliver. Another of our presenting sponsors is KeyBank Foundation, and joining us on film to speak on their behalf is KeyBank Executive Vice President David M. Reynolds.
Hello, my name is David Reynolds, and I'm a Senior Vice President with Key Private Bank, here representing KeyBank and the KeyBank Foundation. We are very excited to partner with Lakeview Cemetery Foundation in recognizing Black History Month and African American achievement. We at KeyBank understand the importance of diversity and consider it one of our pillars of success, internally and also externally in the Cleveland and greater Cleveland community. We believe that we should support the communities that we live and work in, and we're happy to partner with Lakeview Cemetery Foundation in its great work. We want to congratulate Lakeview Cemetery Foundation and wish it continued success. Thank you.
Thank you to David M. Reynolds. And now we come to the reason we're all gathered here today, to celebrate one of those history makers I mentioned earlier who's buried in Lakeview Cemetery. Like tens of thousands of other African American women in the early 20th century, Jane Edna Hunter came to Cleveland from her southern birthplace in search of a better life. When she arrived in 1905, she found a segregated city that didn't offer safe havens for single Black working women like herself. What she did about that is what makes her unique. Here to tell us more of Jane Edna Hunter's story is Hiram College Instructor of Sociology, Anisi Daniels-Smith.
Please. To advance the slides? Okay, right arrow. All right, good morning. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I worked so hard at this presentation that I myself. Um, I kid, right? What a wonderful opportunity to be here and to hopefully get a chance to dialogue with all of you concerning this great woman who has left a legacy that all of us can learn from, which we will talk about a little later. It is my second time presenting on Jane Edna Hunter, and I'd like to thank Lakeview Cemetery, and I would like to thank WVIZ and also the Western Reserve Historical Society as well for this opportunity to talk with all of you today. All right, so let's get started, shall we? So Jane Edna Hunter was born December 13th, 1882 to Harriet Milner and to Edward Harris. Right, and they were both former slaves, right, who worked as wage earners. And so in thinking about what does that mean in terms of background, I'm asking everyone to consider, right, what does it mean to have a legacy? So it is easy for us to talk about where we came from, who our parents are, but what does it mean to leave a legacy? So Jonas Salk asked the question, are we being good ancestors? So we think about ourselves in the present time, but we don't think about the fact that at some point we will be somebody's ancestors. So what are we doing with our lives that will make us good ancestors? Also, the question of when you have left your life, you will be judged not for your possessions, but for your contributions. So we know quite a bit about the contributions of Jane Edna Hunter, but very little about her possessions, which was more important in her life. And finally, in thinking about our lives, do we only have one? Well, at least one person says, not necessarily. Death has only one hand glove. So it takes away the body, but it leaves behind the impacts. Difference makers live twice, both in body and in impacts. The former is temporal, but the latter actually lasts a long time. So we have a little bit of the background on Jane Edna Harris at the time, right, who was born in this cabin, which was recently reconstructed, right, in her memory and in her honor, right? So she was born on a former plantation on the outskirts of Pendleton, South Carolina. And her father moved their family into town so that his children could receive an education. The school was affiliated with the Silver Spring Baptist Church, right? And so here's a picture of the Silver Spring Baptist Church as it stands today. After her father died following a brief illness, she went to work. She was 10 years old. And I want you to imagine having to go to work at 10 years old to help take care of your family. She performed jobs such as domestic work, right, which ended pretty soon because she was very ill-treated by her employers. She also picked cotton, which she said was very, very difficult for her, and babysitting, which didn't last long because the babysitter's mother, or the baby's mother, accused her of insolence, meaning that she did not do everything that she was told to do. So then in her early years, Jane persuaded her mother to allow her to attend Ferguson and Williams College, which was a boarding high school started by African-American Presbyterian missionaries in Abbeville, South Carolina. And the college was renamed the Harbison Black Presbyterian College in 1898. So here is a picture of Harbison Hall at that particular college. After completing a 4-year program there, 18-year-old Jane found a job near the school. However, there was about to be a great change in her life. Her mother forced her to return home and to enter into an arranged marriage with Edward Hunter, who was 40 years older than she was. Within 18 months, Jane made a choice. Here's a clue. Jane made a choice, and it was very unconventional at the time, of permanently separating from her husband. And she moved to Charleston, South Carolina, where she lived for the next 5 years. There she cared for the children of attorney Benjamin Rutledge Jr., right, before enrolling in a training college at Cannon Street Hospital. Right? And so here was her employer after she left, her relationship. And I want you all to get a sense of how unusual this sort of thing was. When people got married during this time, they stayed married. There was no question, or very little question, right? So hopefully you are already getting a sense, right, of how unusual, right, this woman was. So after doing this, she enrolled in college and another training school, and this was founded by Alonzo C. McLennan, who was an African-American physician. Dr. McLennan and 6 other African-American healthcare professionals met to discuss the need for a hospital. We take it for granted now that we can simply go to a hospital and people will care for us. At this time, many people did not have access to regular health care. So this hospital was created because African-American physicians and healthcare professionals got together and decided, right, that there was a need for this type of care in the city of Charleston. At the time, white hospitals either excluded or segregated Black patients, and Black physicians were not allowed to come in and attend to their patients. So in the late 1890s, the need for Black physicians and Black nurses gave birth to this particular college. And so this is to give you a little bit of background as to an understanding of this woman and how she could identify needs. She worked in institutions where they were looking at needs and identifying these types of needs. As she worked, Jane went on to work with well-established white and Black doctors in the Low Countries of these areas before enrolling in the nursing training school, right, affiliated with Dixie Hospital at Hampton College in Hampton, Virginia. The vocational school was modeled after Tuskegee Institute. After completing 1 year of the 2-year program, she headed to Richmond, where friends convinced her to relocate with them to Cleveland. Lakeside Hospital in 1905 is the picture on your left for those of you who are looking at the screen. All right, so this is Euclid at Ninth. It looks west toward Public Square. All right, so we have the Schofield building on the left as well. The Hickox building is the one to the right. It's where the PNC Center is now. Anyone recognize this area? The City Club building on the left with the columns is still there, but the facade has been removed. It's where the CVS is now located. At the turn of the 20th century, Cleveland's small Black population of only 5,988 people lived in almost every area of Cleveland, although many African Americans lived on the east side. Most remain closer to the bottom than the top of the economic ladder. And this is the type of environment into which Jane Edna Hunter found herself. Her transition to the city, all right, was very interesting. Northern doctors would not hire Black nurses. She attempted to find safe and affordable housing for herself, and she ended up living in a brothel. And when she sought entertainment, she mistakenly attended a party that was hosted by a local hustler named Albert Starlight Boyd, who was recruiting female newcomers for prostitution. All right. And so just to give you a little background on this man, okay? Albert Starlight Boyd was a Republican ward leader. He was a saloon keeper, a gambling house operator, and a pimp. He was the great mogul of organized vice, wrote Jane Edna Hunter, a prominent Black social worker, all right? A suave, impressive, impervious to shame, and gifted with the art of leadership. I'm guessing some of you probably have some relatives and friends who could fit that bill as well. I certainly do, right? And so he had his hands in some of everything. So you have this woman who is a social worker who is looking to do good and do positively among her people, and then she runs into this man. So Starlight Boyd, which it's unclear which came first, his nickname or his star-shaped diamond-studded watch charm, right, was as shrewd and calculating as one could be. Right, so as a ward leader, he could get the Black vote, all right, and help tip the balance of local power. Here's an example. As Black migrants came from the South and moved into crowded neighborhoods along Central Avenue, Boyd followed them. He built the Starlight Cafe on East 14th Street, south of downtown, complete with baths, a barbershop, and a pool room. He bought apartments and houses and rented them to his allies. He sent food baskets to the needy. And his 11th ward gave more votes to Republicans than any other part of Cleveland. When one precinct voted 24-5 for his candidate, Boyd still was unsatisfied, and he said, "Tomorrow I will find those 5 votes and they will learn something." So this gives you an idea as to this woman who comes up against this man who says, no, I will not go along with what it is that you are asking me to do. So we now have not only the social ills that she was facing, we not only have the financial ills that she was facing, we now have political roadblocks that could potentially keep her from doing what it was that she set up to do. However, after finding a steady nursing job and good housing with the assistance from new friends from her church, Jane was plunged into suicidal depression following the sudden death of her mother in 1910. She was able to push past her grief by redirecting her sorrow into helping young women and girls who were being turned away from Cleveland's white YWCA due to its segregationist policies. The Phyllis Wheatley Association was established in 1911 in Cleveland as the Working Girls Home Association. Hunter created the association to house and help unmarried African-American women and girls. There were newcomers to the North who were often preyed upon by individuals, right, who were trying to get them to do all types of labor and exploit them. With $1,500, she opened the Working Girls Home Association, a boarding home for 10 women at East 40th, north of Central Avenue. Later that year, a 2-story building at 2265 East 40th Street was purchased, and the name changed to the Phyllis Wheatley Association in honor of a late 18th century Boston slave considered the first African-American poet. The number of residents soon strained the capacity of the 23-room house. So this process sounds very easy and straightforward, and it always is when we look at it in a historical sense. However, what we find is that this was not as straightforward. Ms. Hunter held a strong ideological position regarding integration. She actually argued that the struggle for integration was misguided. Her argument was this: too often, alas, has the Negro been misled by the leaders of his own race. There are those false prophets who would persuade us that someday the Negro will be absorbed by the white race. What the Negro really desires is a change of industrial and economic status so that he may enjoy the privileges and culture that other men possess. So what she was saying is that we don't need to be absorbed into another race in order to get what other people have, and it should not happen that way. By thorough and complete miscegenation, being absorbed into others, we should lose our richest heritage. The Negro must continue to make his distinct contribution to the world as a Negro. So she had a very strong and clear stance of maintaining her Blackness, her identity, and the identities of others as people moved ahead. So her argument is we shouldn't have to trade off who we are in order to get what we need. So the Phyllis Wheatley Association met with opposition, not just from others, all right, in terms of race, but also within the Black community. Right? And this dispute is somewhat illustrative of a long-standing ideological clashing that we find, right? So, for example, Harry Smith, a newspaper editor and 3-term representative in the Ohio General Assembly, once labeled the Phyllis Wheatley Association as a Jim Crow hotel for Black girls and denounced it for years as a step down on the path to institutional integration. According to Ms. Hunter, she said the main opposition came from a small group of club women who, blessed with prosperity, had risen from the servant class and now regarded themselves as the arbiters and guardians of colored society. So to translate that into terms that we can all understand, she argued that just because you get a little bit of money, that doesn't mean that you can speak for everyone. The lack of awareness among higher class African Americans regarding this discrimination, all right, is reflected in one of the criticisms that she received. One woman said to Ms. Hunter, "We will not permit you, a Southerner, to start segregation in this city." Another member said, "We call on the white people and the white people call on us. Now that the more intelligent of us have broken down the barriers between the races, you're trying to build them up again with your absurd Southern ideas for working girls." The founders of Phyllis Wheatley eventually overcame these critics, in part through converting Black ministers to support their endeavor. This is very similar to what we find in African American communities even today, where usage of religious institutions becomes very important to the progress of people as a whole. The Phyllis Wheatley Association started with a nickel and a prayer. Ms. Hunter would regularly meet with supporters who gathered together weekly for prayer, and they brought nickels to raise funds for their vision. By 1916, 170 girls were being housed yearly in Phyllis Wheatley, and many more were using its facilities. To achieve this state, Ms. Hunter had to relinquish the original goal of only Black control of the institution. Though billed as such by supporters, the association was almost entirely financed by whites. Ms. Hunter faced the challenge of balancing the influence of whites who knew little about those who were served, right, and meeting the real needs of recent Southern immigrants. By 1917, the association purchased a 3-story building to house 75 at the northwest corner of East 40th and Central. An adjoining building purchased in 1919 housed social and educational activities and the Stevens School of Music. The home provided a wholesome atmosphere and vocational training, often teaching service skills. Ms. Hunter was well aware that the presence of whites on the board was partially due to an effort to keep Black women out of the YWCA. For example, one member who became the first president of the Wheatley's Association Board of Trustees was also the head of the YWCA when it began its discriminatory policy. However, she placed what she saw as the greater good of the services of the organization above the injustices that were perpetuated through the gatekeeping mechanisms on the other board. In 1925, Ms. Hunter graduated from the Cleveland Law School, then affiliated with Baldwin Wallace College, and she was admitted to the Ohio Bar. By 1927, when Ms. Hunter opened the new 8-story building, which included an integrated cafeteria. How about that? A beauty shop and a gymnasium, she had made enormous strides in her professional life. She had earned a law degree and passed the Ohio Bar exam. She had become active in the Black Women's Club movement, including affiliations with Mary McLeod Bethune, African-American educator and founder of Bethune-Cookman College, and Nanny Burroughs, African-American educator and founder of the National Training School for Women and Girls in Washington, D.C. Interestingly enough, what we also find is that as she did all of these sorts of things, she also engaged in plenty of writing as well. And I would like to give a moment and introduce to you a representative of the Western Reserve Historical Society who has some artifacts to share with you. Chad?
I have a lanyard in my hand, so. Which artifact did we want to look at first? So we just heard the term nickel and a prayer, which Jane Edna Hunter would use later on. And this is an original copy of her autobiography that she created that we have in the archives of the Western Reserve Historical Society. So she would continue to use this phrase, and then this was used as a way for her to tell her story, but also promote the work of the Phyllis Wheatley Association. Another item we have is Jane Edna Hunter's membership card for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, otherwise known as the NAACP. And this was really, their main thing was legal work that they did, cases going everything from anti-lynching laws that were going on the books in Congress to also fighting for segregation or desegregation later on, especially with the Brown versus Board of Education. And then famously, Thurgood Marshall, who was a lawyer for the NAACP, would become the first African-American justice in the United States Supreme Court. And on the back of the card, it explains the purpose of being a member, but also gave advice for if you had legal troubles, how to contact the NAACP, and they would help you out. Some other documents that we have from, I'm going to set the folders down. We have a pamphlet from the Phyllis Wheatley Association. And this was a pamphlet that was created for the 35th anniversary of the Phyllis Wheatley Association and an appreciation dinner of Miss Jane Edna Hunter. And again, this pamphlet just goes through and explains the work of the Phyllis Wheatley Association. And on the back, it has a list of the actual members of the board and trustees of Phyllis Wheatley. And then placing Miss Hunter on a national stage, we have a document from 1949. It's the 140th anniversary of the birth of Abraham Lincoln, which became an annual dinner and fundraiser for the Republican Party, and it was hosted by the Republicans of the Congress and the League of Republican Women. And when you look at the keynote speakers and the program guide, you'll see Ms. Hunter is the only non-politician that spoke at this event, so it places her on a national stage. And just right after Ms. Hunter presented, you have Senator Margaret Chase Smith, the first woman in Congress. She is a representative that actually started her career in Congress in 1916, 4 years before women even had the right to vote for presidential elections across the country. And then the last speaker for the night was Thomas Dewey, who ran for president in 1944 and 1948. In 1944, he ran against President Roosevelt. In 1948, it was the famous Dewey beats Truman, where the newspaper headlines incorrectly predicted that Thomas Dewey would win the election. And there's a famous photo of President Truman holding up the paper. So right here, you can see Ms. Hunter's importance on that national stage. Put all the folders up here. And then the last two things I want to show are, again, congratulations that Ms. Hunter received from prominent individuals. And we have, and then one, of course, when you work with archives, we have to look at the integrity of documents. So these are reproductions of the original documents that the originals had too much acid and they were too fragile to bring out. But here we have a telegram. And this is something that it's probably an early version of a text message when they would send it through telegraph wires, where if you ever saw in TV shows when people push the thing and it makes the dots and dashes. But this was a way for people to send messages across the country electronically. And this was for that appreciation dinner that coincided with that earlier brochure, but it's from the famous Cleveland playwright Langston Hughes. And it's in congratulations for the 35 years work of the Phyllis Wheatley Association. And the last document I'll show is another connection to Ms. Hunter's importance on a national stage. This is one of our first female congressmen from Ohio, Frances Payne Bolton, who was the representative in the United States Congress from the east side of Cleveland. And one of Frances Payne Bolton's longest legacies is the creation of the Cadet Nursing Corps during World War II, but also the creation of the Frances Payne Bolton School of Nursing at Case Western Reserve University. So this was a newsletter sent out to her constituents in conjunction with National Nurses Week. And in this, besides talking about the importance of nursing as a profession, she singles out the work done by the Phyllis Wheatley Association and especially mentions Miss Jane Edna Hunter and the work that she was doing for African American nurses in the city of Cleveland. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Nickel and a prayer. And is this back in print? Do you know?
No, the Historical Society reprinted in the 1980s. There's another reproduction, so it's not currently in print, but there are copies at local libraries, and even at the Historical Society, we have some copies for sale of the reprint from the 1980s.
Great, thank you. Great. And so rounding this out, in addition to all that was done through the Phyllis Wheatley Foundation and continues to be done, right? And so what I want you to understand is that in creating these sorts of things, that there are lots and lots of facets that go into what we see now and today. Right? So in addition to all that Ms. Hunter had done, she began to invest in the stock market. Right, so she used her nest egg to establish the National Phyllis Wheatley Foundation to provide college scholarships for women from Ohio and South Carolina. Since the early 1970s, the foundation has awarded scholarships to women enrolled in colleges throughout the United States and in Europe. And as mentioned, she went on to publish her autobiography through Parthenon Press entitled A Nickel and a Prayer. She published a second edition in 1941 and worked at the Phyllis Wheatley Association for another 16 years before retiring. After retirement, she increased her participation in the lecture circuit and speaking to diverse audiences around the country regarding democracy, interracial cooperation, and women's rights. She also wrote columns for local Cleveland newspapers and national African American newspapers. She also established the National Phyllis Wheatley Foundation to provide scholarships, and in 1971, she passed away. However, her legacy lives on, and I am very, very honored to say that her legacy lives on in a number of ways, one of which being that one of her descendants is here with us today, right, who also sits on the board of the Phyllis Wheatley Association. So I have to admit, right, that I was asked to provide an overview of sorts regarding this remarkable woman's life, and there's so much that has been left out. So if you can get your hands on a copy of the text, right, of her book, please do so. But what I must do, I always do in my classrooms and otherwise, is that people, when they listen to these things, ask, what's in it for me? What can I learn from this? What can I take away from this? And some of you may just be wondering, why am I even here? There are lessons to be learned, right, from this life. Here are some of the things that I want you to take away as thoughts. First of all, we cannot deny difficult beginnings or assume that these difficulties don't affect our progress. It's very easy for us to want to file away or hide the difficult things that have happened to us. We all want people to look at us as capable, able people who can accomplish anything. But difficult beginnings can actually be a gift. And we can use these difficulties in order to understand that our progress may be affected, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be denied. Secondly, sometimes we find our calling in the midst of our pain. Jane Edna Hunter faced many difficulties, losing parents, depression, finances, etc. But even in her difficulty, she found her calling, reaching out to and helping others. If you want to build a positive legacy, pay attention to the needs around you. Note it doesn't say the needs that are just in you, but also the needs that are around you. There will never, ever be a time when you will be lacking in an opportunity to answer the needs of someone else. If you want to build a legacy, pay attention to the needs that are around you. Fourth, make connections in order to reach your goals. We look at people who have reached their goals and we think that they have done it all by themselves. They have not. Nobody does these things on their own. We are all connected to other people. So even at a young age, it is important to make connections that will help you to get to where you need to go. If you want to reach your goals, it's not just in you, it's also around you. And finally, focus, persistence, and resilience. Repeat. Focus, persistence, and resilience. We make the mistake of thinking that the most talented or the smartest people are the ones who get ahead, when in actuality, focus, persistence, and resilience make the difference. And finally, I would like to leave you with an introduction to someone else who is carrying on this work, Dr. Rhonda Robinson Thomas, right, who is a professor of English at Clemson University. I always love to leave my students with an opportunity to engage in more work. And so she has taken on that Jane Edna Hunter project. And what she does is she does work with students, all sorts of archaeological work, historical work, etc., in order to maintain and build the legacy of Jane Edna Hunter. And if you are interested in dialoguing with Dr. Thomas and or reading more about her work and how she works with students, you can just go to www.jehproject.com and you can find that information. Thank you for your attention, and I welcome any questions that you have.
Thank you again to Anisi Daniel-Smith, instructor of sociology at Hiram College, and also to Chad Malkamaki, who's a public program manager at the Western Reserve Historical Society, for sharing those artifacts from Jane Edna Hunter. What happens now is that you all get a chance to ask questions about Jane Edna Hunter and the time she lived in and what she accomplished. And if you have a question here in the studio, you can step right up to the microphone right there. And for our distance learning watchers, we encourage you to send email questions, and the address is townhall@ideastream.org. So take use of that if you can. And before we get started with the questions, I want to acknowledge that there are a couple of descendants of Jane Edna Hunter in the audience today. Could I see a hand raised from Angela Thompson and Craig Thompson? Thank you both for being here. Thank you both for being here. And I believe we have someone at the microphone right now. give us your first name and your question.
Hello, my name is Stephanie, and my question is, you said that the building was on 40th. Is that still there?
I heard a yes. All right. Is there someone else who would like to?
Is the building still called the same?
Craig, you want to answer?
The main building was actually 46 in Cedar. The original building was on 40.
Was that 40th?
So now we're at 46 in Cedar.
Okay.
So
46 in
what's the
Cedar
building
now. The original building was at 40th.
That's the 9-story building.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Anyone else stepping up to the mic right now? In that case, I have some questions that came to my mind. Anisi, you talked about the young women coming to Cleveland and to northern cities, really all over the place, in the Great Migration from the South. And when we say that, it's just a phrase that makes it seem like, oh, they just hopped on a bus or a train or in a car and motored up north. But it wasn't that simple. Talk about some of the difficulties of actually leaving your home place in the South and making it to the North.
Sure. And so this is something that I think that people even face now in terms of immigration, right? So why do they do these sorts of things? Partially because mainly for economic reasons and for education. So we have those two reasons why people travel. And even today, people travel for those same reasons. You will leave a place or leave your family. However, it is not as difficult now as it was then, leaving all of your family behind. Think about the courage that it took because you wanted a better life, or you wanted to go to school, you wanted to be trained in order to take care of your family, be able to take care of yourself, pursue education, etc. And so when we think about those who came before us, we say, well, you know, this great migration, as you said, but in actuality, days and weeks and months of traveling and the danger that goes along with that in order to get to a place where you can pursue an education or actually get a job to sustain yourself. Mm-hmm.
And it seemed unusual to me that so many single black women were moving on their own at that time around the country in the early part of the 20th century, because women in general, as you mentioned, didn't have the same rights as men did of either any race.
Well, for women of color in particular, right, so we talk about these sorts of things as if women were sort of like divided. They were in the house and then you had men. But for women of color, particularly African-American women, this was never the case. They have always worked. And so they had opportunities that were available to them, albeit they were limited opportunities, but, right, so nurses, teachers, as well as domestic laborers, et cetera. So they pursued the work. You also had a mismatch with regard to being able to get married. It's what we in sociology call the marriage gradient, right? That men or women are more likely to marry up, meaning they're more likely to marry older men or men who have substance or could take care of them. Well, when we see the vast amounts of murder, you know, and all sorts of things that went on with African-American men primarily as a target, right? So African-American women could not depend on being married and being taken care of in those same types of ways. So they had to create other opportunities for themselves in order to make that happen.
And we have someone else at the microphone.
Can you tell me more about the Jane Edna Hunter Project, or how teenagers can get involved?
Yes, all right. So I actually contacted, all right, Dr. Thomas ahead of time, all right. So that, and she is very, very open to dialoguing with students. So you can look her up on her website, or you can go to this website right here, and all of her contact information is listed. And so they have been graciously hosted, all right, by the board of Phyllis Wheatley, and they look at archives, right, and so they read letters, they look at the materials. The Western Reserve Society also has those sorts of things as well, and so they are actually creating, also they're working on a movie, all right, regarding her life, and so the screenplay, the acting, gathering the resources to do that, all of those sorts of things. Dr. Thomas is very open to working with students in order to make that happen. Definitely contact her.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the question.
So I know this is kind of like a far-fetched question, but I know she went through some hard times, and so you said she was depressed and down. And I know, like, with a lot of people who are successful, they have mentors who they can talk to and you know, get advice or guidance or suggestions from. So I was wondering, did you know who Jane's mentor was, or anybody that she looked up to?
All right. That is an excellent question. Actually, I think in terms of being able to speak to that, all right, with relevance, is it okay if we allow one of her relatives to speak to that? All right. Would you mind, Craig, or would you mind speaking to that?
And you
Okay.
can step to the microphone right there.
Yeah, I think that those who are closer could speak to that even better than I could.
Basically, I can just say that as far as a person that was actually her role model, I think a lot of it was actually intestinal fortitude that she had. Luckily, she did have the opportunity to get the ear of some very rich and powerful, Caucasian men in the city of Cleveland. John D. Rockefeller and Mr. Williams from Sherman-Williams Company was also some of her mentors, basically. And during the building process of Phyllis Whitley Association, she did consult with them many times. And as far as I know right now, I think my sister will probably correct me, but I think the Phyllis Whitley, I think we're actually the third or fourth largest African-American building built in the United States right now. I know North Carolina Mutual in Durham, North Carolina at one time was the largest, but right now I think they only occupy one floor in their building, whereas we still have nine stories, and we're actually full occupancy now as far as the people that we house. So I think that might have been her role models and people she looked up to, but I think more than anything else, it was just things that she wanted to do.
Okay, we have been studying Jim Crow laws. Would you consider her work a help in destroying these laws?
I'm sorry, I don't think we could hear that down here. Just a little bit. Speak up just a little bit.
Okay. We have been recently studying in Jim Crow laws. Would you consider her work a help in destroying those laws?
Help in destroying Jim Crow laws.
Absolutely. And so when we think about addressing laws or unfair laws, right, in our society, it's not just one or two things or like sort of this big bang thing that happens. It's usually a chipping away at these sorts of things. And so I think that in destroying these sorts of things, we have to show what's possible. And with this legacy, she showed what was possible for sure, right? So in chipping away at these laws and creating, right, an institution where it was meeting a need in a society, I would say absolutely.
And we have someone else stepping up to the microphone, but I want to acknowledge that it seems like there might be some questions in some of our distance learning classrooms, but we can't hear you. So if you could email us, townhall@ideastream.org, so we can get your questions in. townhall@ideastream.org. Okay, next.
Okay, so I want to ask, because you said how Southern women had hardships where they were coming up to the North. Were the Southern women ever looked more down upon than the Northern women that were already here?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. I mean, and very subjective, I think, in terms of interpretation. If we say look down on, we could look at that in terms of laws, right? What was available to them. So we could say that Northern women somewhat had it better in that respect. But if we just looked at everyday interactions with people that across the United States, that, historically we can see that there was this idea that African Americans were just simply inferior, all right? And so we've had a long history of these sorts of things. So I would say, if I have to give you my final answer, all right, I would say that the North was a bit better because they had more opportunities. But when it came to actual social interaction and the ability to get ahead, all right, I think that an African American woman was an African American woman.
I meant more so inside of the African American, inside of our community where they look.
Okay, all right, so that puts a different slant, all right, on it. And so I think in a case like that, we would say that probably in the North that African American women got more support because there was more institutional support, all right? So they were less looked down upon because in other arenas, people could gather support for them, like, for example, having access to things that would allow them to support financially, et cetera. So I would say probably a bit better in the North, but I guess if we were to go back and ask about that, all right, Southern women would probably find a tremendous amount of support among their friends and family because they were all they had.
But there was one point in your talk where you mentioned Jane Edna Hunter wanting to get the Phyllis Wheatley Association organized, or the Working Girls Association first, and people who were here in Cleveland saying they didn't want that Southern woman coming in and dismantling what they were trying to do in terms of integration.
Yes, all right, so stirring the pot, right? I mean, if you talk about integration in this way, or if you even bring up the issue, you're stirring the pot, you're making it worse. And so some of us even encounter this today. If you just stop talking about it, it would go away. And so we have lots and lots of evidence that this is actually not the case at all. All right, we're doing okay, don't bring up these issues, we're doing just fine. And she said, no, there's actually something better on the other side of raising these issues.
And our next question?
I just wanted to ask, you said that Jane Edna Hunter had picked cotton, and you said that it was hard for her. Can you explain more on that? Like, how was it hard for her?
So picking cotton is backbreaking work, right? It is, and cotton is sticky, okay? And it is designed to keep weevils and other things away, like it has little sticky things on it. And so being able to pick cotton like that, people's fingers bled all the time, right? And so until you build up, right, calluses on your fingers, et cetera, people bled all the time picking cotton. So you could imagine, and cotton grows fairly tall. So if you're a little kid and you're trying to pick cotton, right, that is your height or maybe taller than you, in addition to having to do this, and it takes all day work, all right, to produce relatively few pounds of cotton. All right, so, and we look at these sorts of things today and we think that must have been terrible, right? But when we actually get a sense of how much labor is involved in picking cotton, you could imagine how difficult it would be, especially for a small child.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, was this Great Migration similar to the Underground Railroad?
Yeah, it is. It was similar in the sense that people depended heavily upon each other to get where they were going, for sure, right? Otherwise, the Great Migration was out in the open, right? So it was very open as far as travel and where people were trying to get to and identifying opportunities for work, right? But they depended heavily upon each other because you had this pushback from many, many groups who felt like, as labor unions, white labor unions, as well as farmers, agricultural workers, et cetera, who saw African Americans as a threat to their way of life as well as their economic well-being. So in many ways, they depended upon each other. Once again, it was just more open than the Underground Railroad.
Thank you.
But one thing that goes back to the first question I was asking about just traveling from the south to the north, people who were migrating couldn't just stop anywhere to get fuel, to get food, to get comfort. So in a sense, there were stations along the way that they had to find as they were migrating.
That's right, yes, it was a network that helped them to get there, absolutely.
Since Edna's mom had a say-so on her marriage, did she have a say-so on her divorce too?
I'm sorry,
since Edna's mom had a say-so in her arranged marriage, did she have a say-so on her marriage too? I mean, when she got divorced.
Right. From what I've read, as far as should she or should she not, is that what I'm hearing?
Did her mom have a say-so if she got divorced or not?
Right. Did her mom have a say-so?
A say-so in whether or not she got a divorce, right? No, she did not, all right? And so once again, this speaks to the fortitude of this woman who just makes this decision when the expectation is that she would be married and stay married to this man because he was stable, et cetera, all right? And she said, yeah, I'm not doing that.
Thank you.
Good morning. I just wanted to ask, did Miss Edna Hunter, did she, like, were there African American people that were inspired by her today in our times?
African American people who would?
Like, who are inspired by her, like, today?
Who were inspired?
Inspired. All right, so, yeah, me being one of them for sure, all right? Absolutely me being one of them, and there's one standing next to you, all right? Do you mind talking about that for a moment, like how the inspiration that goes along with her legacy? I know you didn't come to work, but we appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to say, people from Tallahassee, you know. I've heard a lot of things about your academic excellence, and congratulations. Public school and treatment, correct? All right, good. Well, I definitely want to tell you guys too, especially the ladies in the house. There's a scholarship that a lot of people don't know about. It's the Jane Edna Hunter Scholarship Fund. It's through Key Bank.
Yeah.
Speaking of the microphone.
Oh, okay. I like to look at it. It's through Key Bank, and basically it was started 50, 60 years ago. And what we do every year is we give away the interest from the fund that we have. Last year was roughly $137,000 that we gave away. The scholarship fund is only for young ladies in the state of Ohio and the state of South Carolina. Unfortunately, what we've had more applicants from South Carolina than we do in the state of Ohio. And more of the college students go to the University of Clemson than we do local colleges here in Cleveland. So ladies, please, if you get the chance, please make sure that you apply online through the Jane Edna Hunter Scholarship Fund through Key Bank. So I think that's real important for you guys to look at an opportunity to get some college funding there. So what was the question? Where were we starting?
Were any people inspired by her in our modern day?
Wow. We've got people that are on the board now that their parents met at Phyllis Wheatley Association. Our executive director's parents met there. Our president of the boards, his parents met there. My mother and father, when they first were married, lived next door in our house that you see next door to the facility. My sister and I, we probably went there every other Sunday. So yeah, there's a lot of inspiration out there. There's a lot more people that we're trying to inspire too. So what we do now, we basically house seniors. We have a daycare center, and we also have a camp. So our mission has changed a lot because of the fact that a lot of the things that happened, in the early 1900s are not things that are very prevalent as they were back in that day. So our mission has changed a little bit. We try to inspire and be inspired every day. So thank you for your question.
Thank you. We have about 4 minutes left, so I think we can get in the last two questions there.
Good morning. I wanted to know, knowing that she was in NAACP, how else was she involved in the civil rights movement?
So in what other ways was she involved in civil rights activities?
Yeah, activities.
Okay. All right. So NAACP for sure was huge at this time. And so it's important to, are you smiling at pictures being taken of you? Is that what's happening right now?
I'm posing.
I was like, are you posing and smiling? All right. Oops, I'm sorry about that. You just totally threw me off my game with that one. All right. Also, in addition to this, and I want to make sure that I get this right, all right, is that in developing community centers, all right, and activities for people who were otherwise denied these sorts of things, that is a form of civic engagement. That is a form of civil rights activity, all right? And also, in addition to this, writing for newspapers, and this, we're not just writing columns or recipes, this was advocacy that was taking place. And so speaking out with regard to issues of immigration, equality, et cetera. So this was an ongoing process for her, right, up until her death, right? So continual voice and advocacy, right, maintained throughout her death. And I think that there's something to be said there, that we often can choose these sorts of routes because it gets us to a particular place and then we stop, forgetting that these things are ongoing, all right? The forces that push against us are as important as the forces that push us forward. So we need to make sure that we are constantly pushing.
And our last question?
Hello, it's Stephanie again. My question was, okay, so previous y'all said that it was a lot of African Americans buried in the Lakeview Cemetery. I'm writing notes for my teacher, so can y'all give me at least 4 to 5 different African Americans that was buried in Lakeview Cemetery?
Yeah, you know what, I would actually, if you don't mind, all right, African Americans who are buried in Lakeview Cemetery.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I know the ones who are on this program. Besides Jane Edna Hunter, there's Garrett Morris. There is Charles Chestnut. Carl and Lewis Stokes. Oh, sorry. She's writing.
Yes. Okay. And I always want to capture those who are actually representative of this organization and have their voices in these sorts of things. All right. So.
Okay.
Did you get those?
Okay.
So you said Garrett Morgan, Charles
Garrett
Chestnut.
Morgan. Charles Chestnut, that's two.
The daughter Helen was
Oh, and his daughter, and Charles Chestnut's daughter Helen Chestnut, Chesnutt. So Charles and Helen Chestnut.
And Louis Stokes, thank you.
And Carl and Louis Stokes, yes. And I think that's all we have time for, less than a minute left. So let me just thank you all for being a great audience. Thank you all for being a great audience. And have safe travels. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.